Lesson 9.3, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be graphing quadratic functions. Now, today we're only going to do the first part of 9.3. So we're not technically going to graph today. We're going to save that for tomorrow, all right? But what we're going to do is we're going to learn about a graph for a quadratic function, all right? Quadratic functions, their graph, and obviously you don't need to draw these graphs, but you do want to write down this sentence, okay? Every quadratic function has a U-shaped graph called a parabola. Not a parabola, a parabola, okay? And what you have here is a graph. Now, it's either going to be opening up. That means the arrows at the end are facing upward. So that one looks like a U. Now, the other type is it opens down. That means the arrows at the end are facing down. So there's two different types. There's no sideways parabolas. Okay, that would be a different type of graph. Now, it's either going to open up or down. And the graph is called a parabola. Okay? Now, every parabola has to have what we call a vertex. Okay? The vertex is either the lowest point on the parabola or the highest point on the parabola. But what the vertex is literally the word vertex means coming to a point, okay? We cannot have a U-shaped anything unless we have the point at where it stops going downward and it starts going back up. Or it stops going up and starts going back downward, okay? So we have to have a vertex in our parabola, and that's very, very important. A vertex is just a point on a graph. So if this is my vertex right here, this is my y-axis, this is my x-axis, okay? What would be the ordered pair for this vertex? 0, 0. Every vertex is an ordered pair. What about this one? It would be -2, 4. Okay, did everybody see a vertex is just a point on a graph? You have to have an x, you have to have a y. Now, let's look a little more in depth into this graph. Again, you don't technically need to draw this. I mean, it might be a good idea if you want to go ahead and just write this down. But I'm mainly concerned with you getting these things down right here. Okay? I just talked about the vertex and how it's either the highest or the lowest point on a graph. Now, also in your parabola, we have what is called the axis of symmetry. All the axis of symmetry is a line directly through the middle of our parabola. What a line of symmetry says, if I were to fold my graph on that axis of symmetry, what is on the left side will be exactly identical to what is on the right side, okay? For most everybody, if you were to draw a line down the direct middle of your face, that would be your line of symmetry because exactly what is on one side of your face is what is on the other. Okay, that would be where people say your face is very symmetrical or whatever, if you've ever heard that before. Okay, so your axis of symmetry is a line that goes directly down the middle, that if I were to fold the parabola, I would have exactly on one side what I have on the other. Now, guess what? If I know my vertex, I know my axis of symmetry. If you find one, you find the other, because your axis of symmetry will always go directly through your vertex, okay? Because the vertex is going to be in the middle of my parabola. Now, we're going to talk about some of these formulas right here. First of all, your formula for your equation will always be in that form. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. I would memorize that formula if I were you. Memorize that formula, okay? Now, the other formula, well, let me stop there for a second. that is the proper formula. Ax squared plus bx plus c. But when you see it on your paper, it's going to look an equation like this. Let's say y equals 2x squared plus 4x plus 6. Okay? Basically, what you are going to have to identify, is everybody listening? What you are going to have to identify is A, B, and C. A is always the number in front of x squared. So A would be 2. A is not 2x squared. A is just 2. B is always the number in front of x. And C is always the number by itself. Okay? So that's the type of setup our problems are going to be in when we're dealing with quadratic functions. Okay? All the word quadratic means is that I have an x squared in it. Just in case you were wondering, okay? Now, the other formula that you need to memorize is the formula for the x value of a vertex. Now, I just got finished in the last slide saying a vertex is a point on a graph. So I need an x and a what? Y. This formula right here only tells you the x. So don't think when I use this formula, I'm all done. We're going to have to plug that back in to find y. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second, okay? So go ahead and write this down. Go ahead and write this down. So there are 3 things you need to know about a graph. 3 things that we're going to learn today that's going to get you ready to actually graph equations tomorrow, okay? What that is, all right? First of all, I need to know, is my parabola going to go up or is it going to go down? And this is exactly how you do it. There's absolutely no work involved in this at all. What I do, okay, is I look at A. A is the number that is going to be in front of x squared. So if I had my equation like this, let's say it was y equals 2x squared plus 4x plus 3, okay? I would look at A, which A is always in front of x squared, and I would say if it's a positive number, my graph is going to go up. If it's a negative number, my graph will go down. You say, okay, what do you mean? Remember, our graphs will look like this. It points up if it's a positive. If it's a negative, let's say it was this equation, okay, I look for A, and I see that it's a negative number, so that means my graph is going to point down, and it looks like this. Now, we're not going to graph it, obviously, today, but you need to know, is it going to point up or down? And all you've got to do is look at the number in front of x squared. That's it. So I say, okay, in the first equation, it's going to go up, but the second one, it's going to go down. All right, so that's the first thing we're looking for. The second thing we're looking for is we are going to find the vertex, okay? Let's use that same equation that I just had up here. Y equals 2x squared plus 4x plus 6. In order to find the vertex, all right, is everybody paying attention? Because this is where you're really going to want to pay attention. You have to have an x and a y. The formula that they have given us is x equals negative b over 2 times a. First of all, I need to know what a and b are to even be able to plug it in. So let's look back at our equation, which is right here, okay? And I'm going to label a, b, and c. Remember, the formula was y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is A, this is B, and this is C. So I'm just going to write it out. A equals 2, B equals 4, and C equals 6. And remember, it's not 2x squared, it's not 4x, it's just 2 and 4. It's just the numbers, okay? I'm going to use this formula, and I'm just going to plug it in. So if I have negative b, that means I have a negative, and then what's b? 4. Over 2 times a, what's a? 2. All right, let's solve. Negative 4 over 4, which is negative 1. So I know the x value to my vertex is negative 1. But what am I missing? The y. So what you do is you take your original equation right here. Do I know what x is? Yep. So I'm just going to plug in x so that I can find y. This is where your calculator is going to come in handy because you can use your calculator. Okay, I'm going to do 2 times negative 1 squared plus 4 times negative 1 plus 6. Does everybody see what I did? All I did was I just took out the x's and I plugged in negative 1. Guess what? You can type this exact equation into your calculator and it'll tell you the answer. You don't even have to show me any work. So we're going to plug in on our calculator 2. Then in parentheses, I'm going to plug in negative 1 parentheses squared plus 4 in parentheses negative 1 plus 6. If you look at your calculator, it should look identical to your equation that you have written there. Then guess what? Just press enter. What did you get when you pressed enter? Y equals 4. You have to use parentheses. Make sure you use parentheses, okay? Y equals 4. So now I know my vertex. So they're looking for 3 answers. First of all, they want to know whether it went up or down. So I found out since A was positive, it went up. My vertex was the second thing they wanted to know, which is negative 1, 4. And the last thing, they want me to write an equation for the axis of symmetry. Now that sounds like it would be a lot of work. You're like, write an equation, what does that mean? All that means is that you have to have an equal sign, okay? So, I said this in the last slide. I said, if you know your vertex, you know your axis of symmetry. If you know your vertex, you know your axis of symmetry. My vertex is always, my axis of symmetry is always going to be the exact same as the x in the vertex. So guess what my formula or my equation for the axis of symmetry is? X equals negative 1. That's it. All you do is write exactly what x equals. You don't have to do any work. You don't have to write this whole long equation. It's just x equals negative 1. And that is exactly what 3 things they are looking for. Those are the 3 things that we're going to learn today on how to graph, before we graph a parabola. Okay? Okay, so let's solve some of these. So remember, this is exactly what your homework looks like, okay? We are looking for whether the graph opens up or down, the coordinates of the vertex, so it means it's x comma y, and your axis of symmetry. First of all, let's do this first equation right here. We have y equals 5x plus 10x plus 7. Before we do anything, let's label A, B, and C. Okay, let's label A, B, and C, because once I know those, it's going to be much easier for me to figure everything out. Okay? In this equation, Kyle, what is A?
5.
A is 5. Derek, what is B?
10.
And Taylor, what is C? 7. Very good. Okay, now I know what A, B, and C are. Now, how do I know whether the graph opens up or down? If A is positive, it opens up. If A is negative, it opens down. So, Reese, does my graph open up or down? It opens up because I look at A and it's a positive number. So, there's your first answer. Now, the second step wants us to find the coordinates of the vertex. First of all, you have to memorize the formula for the vertex because I will not give it to you on the test or the quiz or the homework. So, what is that formula for the x value in the vertex? x equals negative b over 2 times a. You need to memorize that. So let's just plug in our numbers now. So I'm going to plug in x equals negative 10 over 2 times 5. Okay? Negative 10 over 2 times 5, which is 10. Negative 10 over 10 is negative 1. So for my vertex, is that it? Is that all I have to find? No, it is not, okay? Because your vertex is x comma y. So let's plug that back into our original equation. The original equation is right here. I know what x is, so all I'm doing is plugging that back in to find y. So I have y is equal to 5 times negative 1 squared plus 10 times negative 1 plus 7. Plug that in your calculator. Okay, plug that in your calculator. So I plug it in exactly what it looks like. And remember, use the negative sign. Don't use the minus sign when plugging it in your calculator. 5 parentheses negative 1 parentheses squared plus 10 parentheses negative 1 parentheses plus 7. Oops. Somebody tell me, what did you get? Y equals 2. Perfect. So now I found my vertex, right? I've got x and y. Now the last thing they're asking me to do is write an equation for the axis of symmetry. If I know my vertex, I know my axis of symmetry because it's the exact same as x. So I write x is equal to what? Negative 1. There are my 3 answers that they are looking for. Okay? All right, so the next problem. I'm going to erase all this and start over. Look at this problem right here. What is the form that your equation will always be in? Remember, we said at the very beginning, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Look at this equation. I have y equals ax squared. Do I have bx? Do I have c? No, they're not written. So this is exactly what I'm going to tell you to do. I think it's going to make it easier. If you don't see it, we're going to put plus 0x plus 0. Because that's exactly what b and c are. They're 0. They're not there. They're nothing. So I just like to write it so I know exactly what I'm dealing with. So in this equation, a is what? 2, b is 0, and c is 0. Does everybody see that? Okay, Katie, is my graph going to open up or down? Up. How do you know that? Because it's a positive a. 2 is positive. Now, I've got to find my vertex, which is x comma y. What is the formula to find the vertex?
X equals negative b over 2a.
Perfect. X equals negative b over 2a. So let's plug it in. I'm going to have negative 0 over 2 times 2. Negative 0 over 4. What is anything with a numerator of 0? 0. So my x value is 0. Now let's plug it in and find y. Where am I plugging that x into? Anybody know? The original equation. Very good. So my original equation is y equals 2x, which is 0, squared. Does everybody see where I got that original equation from? It was right here. Okay? Everybody should be writing this down. What's 0 squared? 0. What's 2 times 0? 0. So y is equal to 0. And then lastly, I need to write an equation for the axis of symmetry. What is the variable that represents the axis of symmetry? X. So I know x equals what? 0. All you got to do is look what you had in your vertex. And these are your answers here. Okay? Let's do one more problem that's not on this, and then I will let you do your homework for tonight. Here is your other problem. I'm going to write it right over here. Oops, I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, here's your formula. Go ahead and write this one down. Everybody should be writing this down. All right, before I do anything, Josh, I want to label A, B, and C. So tell me, what is A?
-2.
A is -2. B is 8, and C is -3. Perfect.
It's going to be going down.
Okay? And my graph is going which way, Josh?
Down because that's a -2.
Down, because my A is a negative number. Okay? Now, I need to find my vertex. What is the formula to find your vertex? X equals -b over 2 times A. What is B?
8.
8, so it's going to be -8 over 2 times -2, which is -8 over what? -4, which is going to give me
2.
+2. So now I know my X value. How would I find what Y is, Kyle?
Find the second number.
Plug it back in where?
To the C.
To the original equation. See where X is right here? Because remember, that's what I just found, because it was X equals -b over 2A. So I know that X equals 2. So all I'm going to do is plug that in for X. So now I have Y equals -2 times 2 squared plus 8 times 2 minus 3. Does everybody see where I've got that? Is everybody following me there? Okay? Now just plug that in your calculator. So we would get -2 parentheses 2 squared plus 8 times, or parentheses 2, minus 3 is equal to what? 5. Okay? Now, what is the last thing? The axis of symmetry. How would I write that? X equals 2. Now, one other thing that I do want to tell you about is what would happen if in this equation B was already negative. Let's say that this was -2x. Whoops. Let's say it was -2x minus 8x. What would I do if B is already negative? Because my formula is -b. So what would it become? A positive. Okay, just make sure you remember that. Okay?